Now that we've covered the atmospheric and physical hazards you'll need to recognize, let's move on to the next step, learning how to control those hazards with pre-entry procedures. Basically, you need to follow a simple set of pre-entry procedures before going into a confined space. These procedures are used to identify and control potential hazards before anyone goes in. Now, of course, specific procedures are different for different organizations and depend on the type of space you'll be working in. You'll need to know and follow your specific safety procedures and any local or national safety codes that apply. That may include using an entry permit on each job. If required, follow it exactly. And double-check that all steps have been completed and signed off. If something's been skipped or you've got a question, get it cleared up before anyone goes in. Pre-entry procedures begin by removing hazards inside and outside the space. This would include some things we've already covered, such as tagging and locking out mechanical and piping systems, or where necessary, physically disconnecting, blanking, or draining the systems. Electrical conductors or circuits should also be de-energized where possible. There is one thing to lock in when you can, and that is any existing ventilation. For example, if there's some type of fan or blower, make sure it can't be accidentally disconnected or turned off. Finally, some areas may need to be purged or flushed out before moving to the next step. That step is to test the air. And as simple as this idea is, there's a pretty depressing statistic that goes with it. In almost 100% of all confined space fatalities, no one ever tested the air. And it's not that complicated. What you do need is one of these. Although it goes by a lot of different names, for our purposes, we'll call it an air tester. Although their designs and operations vary, all air testers sample the air for such hazards as a lack of oxygen or the presence of toxic or combustible gases. And they do it without anyone going in. Basically, after identifying and controlling potential hazards, you've got to identify the actual hazards that are left inside. And the first thing to check is the air. Now, everyone's exact air testing procedures vary. You need to fully understand the operation of your particular air tester. But let's go over some of the general wheres and whens of using one. When using a tester, many models are usually first checked and adjusted outside in fresh air. This establishes a proper zero point for measuring combustible gas and oxygen levels. Where you should test the air first is around the outside of the entrance. The reason is that combustible gases might be seeping around it. All it would take is one spark from someone's tools to set them off. Needless to say, so could a cigarette. So remember, no smoking. Then start working your way in, testing just inside or beneath the entryway. Sample through any available openings. If you can't, you may have to slightly open the entry and test just beneath the opening. If the readings here are okay, you take more tests. Basically, you want to sample the air at different levels, starting from the entry point and on into the rest of the space, without anyone going in. If the air tester detects a hazardous atmosphere, there's a variety of things you may have to do next, such as notifying the supervisor of the job, recording the readings, retesting, or whatever your procedures are. What you don't do is think that the readings are wrong or that the air tester is broken. If the air tester says it's not safe to go, don't go in. Trust those readings. And you may have to take readings at different times during an entry. Depending on the job, the air may have to be continuously checked or tested at intervals while people are inside. What's important is to always check the air just before anyone goes in. Don't wait for 20 minutes after testing the air and then have someone go in. A lot could have changed, leaked, or seeped into the area in that time. Plan the job accordingly. As to the tester itself, there's a couple of things to keep in mind. One is to be sure it's been bench tested and checked recently for proper operation. Another thing is to be sure it stays that way. Don't let air testers get kicked around on the job or bounced around on your truck. Treat them as if your life depends on them. After all, it just might. After the air has been tested, other steps may be necessary. Blowers may be used even if the air is okay. They help to be sure it stays that way. Generally, they're run for 15 to 20 minutes to ventilate the area, and then air is tested again. If you're using them, keep the end of the hose properly positioned. Sometimes just sticking it straight down may create gas pockets in the corners of the space. It may be better to angle it so that it blows toward a wall to break up such pockets, or better yet, onto the people working inside. This way they'll get a constant supply of fresh air. And if it's a gas-powered blower, be sure it's far enough away so the exhaust and carbon monoxide doesn't drift into the area or the fresh air inlet. Sometimes blowers can't help. If the air test's hazardous and can't be brought down to safe levels, respiratory protection and other protective equipment may be necessary. Self-contained breathing apparatus, known as SCBAs, and airline respirators are commonly used. Whoever's wearing them should already be trained in their use. And remember to check out the gear before you go in. You'll want to find problems now, not in the middle of the entry. The same thing applies to other protective equipment used when entering hazardous atmospheres, such as safety harnesses, retrieval lines, and hoists. After the air has been tested, check through the entry for other hazards inside, such as excessive heat, noise, or inadequate lighting. Also, if you're using a permit, be sure that all hazards and air readings have been noted as required on the form. Once the air has been tested okay, and all other hazards have been identified and controlled or removed, you're ready to go in. Before you do, remember it takes at least two. A minimum of 2 people are necessary to be sure the job is done safely. The idea here is that someone is outside acting as a safety monitor or attendant for the person working inside, known as the entrant. Let's go over the general duties that an attendant and entrant should follow. Again, specifics will vary from place to place. Some jobs require additional steps and personnel, so be sure to find out what your specific safety requirements are. One of the primary duties of an attendant is to watch out for any uncontrolled inside hazards that might develop, like a valve or pipe that starts leaking, or tagged out equipment that suddenly gets energized. Attendants should also keep account of the number of people inside. They should be on the lookout for outside hazards too, and they must keep unauthorized personnel away from the area.
Everything all right, White? You okay?
To be effective, an attendant has to be in constant communication with the people inside. If you notice a hazard, you have to be able to tell them about it. If you can see them, talking to them may be enough. More isolated jobs may require the use of walkie-talkies or other communications gear. Check with them also to see if they're showing any symptoms of exposure to atmospheric hazards. These symptoms can include slurred speech, confusion, or if they seem giddy. People like that aren't drunk. They're in trouble. When exposure symptoms or an uncontrolled hazard develops, the attendant should order an evacuation at once. The people inside should also get out if the attendant has to leave his station. Nobody should ever be inside a confined space without an attendant. If you're assigned to enter a confined space, you too have certain duties and responsibilities before going in. Entrants need to know the specific equipment and procedures needed for each entry. Once again, that means if personal protection equipment, like respirators, safety harnesses, retrieval lines, or entrance barriers are necessary, you should know how to use and inspect them before going in. If you're following a permit, also be sure that all required equipment, inspections, and signatures are in place before you enter the area. As you enter, be on the lookout for any hazards that might have been missed. Once you're in, further air tests may be necessary, especially in corners or ducts. and around any cracks. These are areas where gases might seep in. Also, be sure that you can clearly communicate with the attendant. Remember, they're working for your safety, too. As you work, watch out for the danger signs of being exposed to hazardous gases, such as if it's hard to breathe, headaches, or your heart pounding or skipping, eye irritation, or strange odors of any kind, such as gas or rotten eggs. Or if you feel drowsy, lightheaded, or confused. If you think you're in danger, get out. You may not have a lot of time. Evacuate the space immediately.